Do the Baltimore Ravens need more at wide receiver even after signing Deonte Harty? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. As always, thank you so much for being here today on Locked On Ravens and making us your first listen each and every day. We're available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your shows. We bring you 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. So news, analysis, updates, we have you covered here. So be sure to tell a friend, tell a family member, we have you covered on your daily Ravens talk. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Purple Friday, we're less than 2 weeks away from the 2024 NFL Draft. In less than 2 weeks, the first night will be completed. We'll know who the Ravens took at pick 30, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they traded up. Maybe they traded back. We're not going to know until a couple weeks from now. But here to talk about the Ravens with me, it is our Purple Friday guest. It is from Fox 45 and the Ryan Ripken Show, Rocco DiSangro. Rocco, we talked about Kyle Van Noy last week and that signing. The Ravens, they're not done, though. Derek DeCosta said, maybe Van Noy's the last guy on my checklist, the Liars Luncheon. Well, the Ravens got Deonte Harty added to their wide receiver room, and more importantly, with these new kickoff rules, added to their special teams unit.
Yeah, and I think that's the second part is why the Ravens actually went out and got Deonte Harty. And it's a pretty cool story because he's a Baltimore guy, native of this city, went to Archbishop Curley High School, was a standout there. And then I believe that he went to Assumption for college. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, yeah, small school coming out of college, and he's able to make it in the NFL. And due to his speed and agility and shiftiness, he's made it as a return man. And last season with the Bills, he had that punt return for a touchdown, and he was turning heads on that punt return. But it was only one of two touchdowns he had last season. I believe the other one was a receiving touchdown. So this isn't a guy that you're necessarily going to bring in to be your number 3 or 4 receiver. He's going to be a guy where, okay, maybe if one of your big names like a Zay Flowers or Nelson Aguilar needs some burn or needs to, take a seat on the bench for a little bit, needs some oxygen, you might bring Deonte Harty in, or maybe for a sweep play or something along those lines. But I don't see him being a big receiving target for Lamar Jackson this season. I think the Ravens are going to use him primarily in the return game.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is, where, look, you can still use Harty in some offensive packages, get him on the field on offense. We've seen him, especially in New Orleans. I mean, he actually had a pretty decent role for a couple years there with the Saints on offense, but he is 5'6". He's one of those smaller wide receivers, which the Ravens do have a decent amount of right now. I think everybody's looking at that big body target. So you're bringing in Harty for the special teams value. And we'll break that down a little bit more in the second part of the show, Rocco, because I think there is a lot of conversation to be had about that. But you look at the Ravens wide receiver group right now. There are 5. It's Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, Tylan Wallace, and Deonte Harty. With those 5, and just after hearing that, are you confident in that group, or do you feel like the Ravens need to add more at wide receiver, whether it be signing another veteran or drafting a guy maybe in the early rounds of the draft coming up?
I would love to see the Ravens do either or. This is not a group that just you look at on paper and you're blown away by. And, while that's okay at this point in the season or this point in the off season, it won't be okay 2-3 weeks into the season when Lamar Jackson is throwing to Zay Flowers and Nelson Aguilar and, hoping Rashad Bateman gets open and he's able to connect with him too. I really do think you need another body in there. Listen, I could be completely wrong, Kevin. We could get 2-3 weeks into the season and they have this group and they're turning heads and blowing people away. I just don't think that that's going to be the case. I do think you either need another veteran in there but a young guy like a maybe first couple rounds at the receiver position. When did the Texans get Tank Dell? I know he's kind of a diamond in the rough, but didn't they take him in like the third or fourth round, something
I think
along those
third
lines?
round, yeah.
If you could get a guy like that, if you could get a steal, and they're hard to come by sometimes, but there are guys that could be very, very, very talented NFL receivers that you can get in the later rounds. It just happens with that position. So I'd love to see the Ravens go out and take a receiver with one of those top picks. Maybe not necessarily the first round. I'd like to see them go more offensive line or cornerback, bolster those two positions. But wide receiver should be right behind at number 3.
Right, and I think people look at what the Ravens have done draft-wise, Rocco, under Eric DeCosta since he took over. And obviously, it is Marquise Brown in the first round in 2019, Rashad Bateman in the first round in 2021, Zay Flowers in the first round in 2023. And people are saying, well, you invested all this draft capital at wide receiver. You have to stop. You got to go to other positions. But the reality is Marquise Brown hasn't been on this team in a couple of years. It just didn't work out. He didn't like the offense. Rashad Bateman, I'm still a believer, but it is wait and see mode in terms of what ends up happening with him. Zay's looking every part of a stud, but that doesn't mean that you still can't invest and add more. And it kind of goes, it's both things where like, I do like the Deonte Harty signing. I think one, Devin Duvernay left for Jacksonville and you get, I think, an on par or even better returner than him at a lesser price. But at the same time, you can still look at the wide receiver room that Baltimore has right now and still want more. And Baltimore, my sweet spot, Rocco, with wide receivers, I don't actually think I've had this conversation with you, but my sweet spot with wide receivers is 6 for a roster. And so Baltimore, already signing, he's going to be a wide receiver. So that's 5. So you have room essentially for one more high draft pick or one more veteran to come in, but they're making these moves. And I know we have had this conversation about Rashad Bateman where Hardy's not a guy that's going to come in and challenge Rashad Bateman for the number 2 job. I mean, it's primarily a special team signing. To me, I've talked about this all week. Honestly, I've talked about it for the past month. These signings, these visits like a Josh Reynolds and Michael Gallup, to me, especially with the Hardy signing, it's confirming that they really want to move forward with Rashad Bateman in that number 2 job and really give him that opportunity to flourish.
Maybe they've had those conversations. I'm sure they have, because you have the 5th-year option deadline coming up. I believe it's May 2nd. So it's coming up. It's right around the corner. We're less than a month away from that. I'm sure Eric DeCosta has talked with Rashad Bateman. One would hope just to see, hey, man, where's your head at? Where our head's at going forward. But you look at Rashad Bateman, you look at the tape from last season, and yeah, he didn't put up eye-popping numbers really at all. And that's, it's not breaking news to anybody. This fan base knows it. He knows it. But the hope is that Rashad Bateman can take much of what he did last year and, when he was getting open. Okay, like we saw that. You saw that on maybe not necessarily in the game tape when you're watching on the broadcast, but in breaking it down and seeing those videos that people have posted, Rashad Bateman was getting open plenty of times, and maybe he wasn't the first or second look. Maybe that can be the case this year where Lamar's looking Rashad Bateman's way at his second look, his third look, getting him the ball. And I'm not knocking Lamar at all. Don't get me wrong there, but I'm saying, like, if they truly think Rashad Bateman can flourish and be a true number 2 wide receiver on this team, be that second in line, by all means, pick up that 5th-year option, let him do his thing this year, and then you got him for next year as well.
And we've also seen the wide receiver contracts become a topic of conversation too, where Bateman's 5th-year option, it's around like $12, $13 million. I mean, we could look back on that in a year and say, wow, well, we just saw, especially this offseason, Rocco, Gabe Davis got 3 for $39. We see Darnell Mooney, I think, get something similar. Like that's 12, 13, like 11 average annual value. You're thinking about, getting Bateman on a 13 or 12 million per year. I mean, that's online. It's pretty much on par with a lot of the other players. Now, again, Bateman, it's kind of the risk you have to run there because you're not going to know how Bateman performs before you pick up the option. I mean, it's what they did with Patrick Queen, where obviously if they could have that decision back, they probably pick up the 5th-year option on Patrick Queen just based off how he balled out. So that's the risk you run. But with Baltimore now, Rocco, it's not only Bateman being the 2 at this point, but Nelson Aguilar is pretty locked in there as your 3 right now before the draft. Tylan Wallace is your 4. I'd honestly put Hardy at the 5 position right now. maybe it's a battle for the 4 spot right now between Wallace and Harty. But to me, how are you feeling about Tylan Wallace? He hasn't necessarily proved a ton at this level. I mean, he's someone that had the big moment with the punt return against the Rams. I think that is his, think Tylan Wallace, you think of that moment. But are you a believer in Tylan Wallace, and would you be okay with Baltimore giving him a bigger role to see what they have this year?
I'm a believer in Tylan Wallace on the returning end. I think he could be the Ravens' primary return man, and maybe that's why they brought Harty in to be like the 1-2 punch with the new kickoff rules back there, which makes sense because then you have 2 guys that can return, or maybe one of them is going to be the kick return guy, one of them is going to be the punt return guy. No, I don't look at Tylan Wallace as a primarily a receiver on the Ravens. I look at him as a return specialist first, and that's okay. That's his craft. And then a receiver second. And I don't know. I'm not comfortable with Tylan Wallace. Like maybe being like getting a few targets, but I mean, look at his production last season. He had what? And I know the receiver room was a little bit more stacked than it's going to be this year. And if you want to use that word stacked, but 1 reception for 2 targets for 11 yards doesn't scream, okay, let's just throw him into the fire and see if he could be like a solid 4th or 5th option for us this year. Go out and get a receiver, draft one, or bring in a veteran. That's what the Ravens need to do. It makes perfect sense for them to do it.
Yeah, I am in the same boat. I think Baltimore does need more at wide receiver. It is a risk, and especially, we're talking about Lamar Jackson's prime here, with every year. And, Lamar has not had that quote unquote number 1 veteran proven guy. Like, Zay has all the potential in the world to be a number 1, but he's not the veteran that you trade for your quarterback. Now, I don't think we're in that conversation with Baltimore. I mean, I've been very vocal about, hey, I'd love for them to go out there and get a Courtland Sutton type, or go out there and get that proven vet, but it just feels like we're not there right now. It feels like they're going to spend an early-ish, whether that is their 1st round pick, or if you talked about it earlier, Rocco, like 2nd, 3rd round, day 2 pick, it can do that. But if it's a Keon Coleman, if AD Mitchell falls to you, if you, I'm not a huge Xavier Worthy skill set guy, just based off what the Ravens need right now. But, if that's the player, or you can get a Xavier Legette potentially. Is that somebody you like out of South Carolina? Jalim Polk, who is Rome Odunze's teammate. Like, there are options, but Baltimore does have to add, because I'd feel a lot, even if it's a rookie, you slot the rookie in, like, let's just say it's Keon Coleman, just to put a name. Keon Coleman's your number 3 behind Bateman and Flowers. Aguilar becomes your 4. I feel a lot more comfortable with Aguilar being kind of in the role he was last year. You're not relying on a Tylan Wallace. You're not relying on a Deonte Harty, but you have those guys in the wings. So it's going to be interesting to see how Baltimore maneuvers around the room, but they definitely should not be done even after signing Deonte Harty, which I think is the most important point of this whole thing. But coming up with the second part of the show, we're going to continue our wide receiver conversation, also get a little bit more into Deonte Harty in particular. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has it covered. With over 122 million parts, your number 1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Also, as well as exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still chopping it up with Rocco DiSangro on this Purple Friday. Rocco, with everything going on in Ravens land right now, obviously they've lost a lot of free agents. In fact, we started talking before the show about how Rock Ya-Sin, Ravens legend, ends up going to the 49ers yesterday. And he said, we'll talk about that. I said, I can't make a show out of that, Rocco. It's another signing. Now, Baltimore, we actually talked about this last week, but only 3 left now with Ya-Sin off the board. 3 free agents out of that whole pool of 20 plus remain. J.K. Dobbins, Dalvin Cook, and Daryl Worley. Those are the three, and I think we still are in agreement, just like we were last week, that Daryl Worley still seems to be the most likely out of those three to come back, which is crazy to think about. But with the Deonte Harty signing, let's just go back into that. You mentioned the kickoff rules. You mentioned his value on special teams, all-pro returner, his rookie season in 2019, Pro Bowler obviously as well. He's somebody that you can pair up with Tylan Wallace with the way this new rule is going to be. And we've seen this across the league where we know, Rocco, the Ravens have valued special teams forever. Like, it's nothing new in Baltimore. But we're starting to see other teams make these special teams only signings. And the thing that gets me about the Harty signing is that other teams were reportedly interested, but it was Baltimore that was able to seal the deal. Now, maybe some of that has to do with the hometown aspect you talked about earlier, Baltimore's tradition on special teams, but this is a very good player in his role, and I expect him just with everything. It's almost like the perfect combination because he is electric, he is speedy, and I think we saw Devin Duvernay take a bit of a step back last year on kick returns. I think Harty can fill some of that void.
Yeah, maybe because I think I said earlier, like Wallace could be the primary guy and Harty could be, or flip-flop their roles. Obviously Harty's got the resume with being the All-Pro or the Pro Bowler, but I really liked what I saw from Wallace last year. And he wasn't just like a, one punch kind of guy where it was all right, that punt return for the touchdown. And that was all. He showed flashes of how good he can be in the return game. So I think, knowing John Harbaugh, this could very well be a competition between the guys like you see every year. There's Devin Duvernay was Devin Duvernay, and he was an all-pro return specialist for a reason. Deonte Harty, same thing, but I fully expect Tylan Wallace to go in there, compete with him for the primary spot, like he's done every single year, and get some burn as well. But with Harty, I do like the signing for the Ravens. Like I said before, not from the receiver standpoint, but for a return specialist standpoint. Because with the new kickoff rules, it's going to be really interesting if you can work with two guys, if you put one guy back, like what the deal is and how teams are going to approach it. And I think the Ravens, having a head coach that was a former special teams coordinator and knows that position group, that unit like the back of his hand, I think it is going to work to their favor because he is going to be the guy who tries to find the strategy in it. And I think it's going to work wonders for this team this season.
I said earlier, I was talking with Kadri Ismail yesterday, and I said, I think signing Chris Board was John Harbaugh's Super Bowl. Like, he just, he loves those types of signings. And I think this is another one where special teams is such an underrated aspect. I mean, we've seen Baltimore win so many games over his tenure with special teams. Obviously, Justin Tucker has won plenty, which is a special teams aspect, but even just like the opposing team botches a return or there's a mess up in kick coverage. And I actually think, Rocco, one of the weaknesses of Baltimore last year was their kick coverage. There were holes on that kick coverage team and punt coverage team that was very unnatural for a John Harbaugh-led Ravens squad. So obviously it's going to be different with the way the new kickoff is, and just, you're not going to have that run up for the players and everybody's going to start the way they are. But there is some sort of a role that I can see Harty having on offense. I don't think it's going to be very big. I think what Todd Monken tried to do early in the season last year was Zay Flowers, just in terms of getting him the ball on screens. And he almost felt like he was almost force feeding Zay on a lot of those plays where it's just like spread the ball out a little bit and take some deep shots. I think you can find a role like that for Harty where he can win on the short and intermediate routes. He does have some speed, so he could potentially be a speed threat for you. But on some of those screens, those end arounds, those reverses, I think maybe that's where Todd Monken is going to try to get Deonte Harty involved. I'm not saying he's going to be a non-factor on offense. I just don't think it's going to be a very big role, but he can still have some impactful plays.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Kevin, with that. I think you're going to see him in maybe those jet sweeps. He'll probably have his own package if they do bring him out on the field. And, you're going to see what he's capable of going to the outside and being able to work in some open space. So I think for the Ravens, that's the hope. And if they're going to use him in this offense, Todd Monken will find a spot for him in the offense. And, they're going to put him in the best position possible to help the team win.
Yep. I think to me also it's Low risk, high reward move in terms of this wasn't a big deal. It was 1 year, right around $1.5 million. So it's not like they invested a ton of money. Baltimore still is going to have around $9-ish million in cap space. If they don't make another move, that's what they'll have entering the draft in a couple weeks. So again, the Ravens have a lot of needs to fill, but it's not just going to be like they're going to fill them all at once or they're going to fill the flashiest first. But returner was technically a need because Devin Duvernay did leave for Jacksonville. Harty comes in. I think you will have a healthy competition. Even though there wasn't a huge sample size with Wallace, I do agree with you, Rocco, where I don't think it was just that punt return against the Rams. I think we did see other stuff from Wallace, and obviously Harty does have the resume. But coming up, we're going to be talking about Baltimore's needs a little more, obviously, with that draft coming up, talking about how things have shifted over the last couple of weeks and where Baltimore could look to invest their hefty amount of draft picks. Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to still on Locked On Ravens. First, this show was brought to you by DK Law Group. When you need a law firm, do you want the legal runaround or would you rather have a no-nonsense approach? Well, you get the latter with DK Law Group. DK Law Group is a Maryland-based law firm who is redefining the legal process with their modern approach. DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. They're tech-savvy, they treat clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. DK Law Group is a woman-led firm with Diana Kahn at the helm. Diana has been called an unparalleled legal expert by some. One of the things you'll quickly notice with DK Law Group is their transparent pricing. They believe in clarity and cost and no one left in limbo. DK Law Group knows that speed is key by leveraging technology. DK Law Group streamlines the process to serve you better and faster. Contact DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. And Locked On listeners can call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline Empowering Legacies. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens with Rocco DiSangro. I am Kevin Ostreich. Really appreciate everybody again for tuning in today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to us in video form and in audio form. It's the same show, both audio and video, so you're not missing out. If you want to watch one day, then listen another. We have you covered anywhere you get your podcasts or any form you decide to consume your podcasts on. But Rocco, with the draft coming up, we know that this is Eric DeCosta's time. He loves the draft. He loves moving up and down the draft board. Probably an understatement of the year to say he loves it. He has that level of appreciation for it. Now, there's been a lot of conversation about what Baltimore's needs are. We talked about it last week with Kyle Van Noy and how that shifted some of what Baltimore's draft strategy could be around the edge position. But we did hear Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh speak to the media this week at the pre-draft press conference, or the Liars Luncheon, as a lot of people like to call it. There were a lot of offensive line questions. You know, our conversations over the past couple months, Rocco, have been centered around offensive line, especially as Baltimore lost those three starters. I don't think anything is shifting when it comes to Baltimore's biggest need. I think it has been the offensive line that will continue to be the offensive line until draft night.
You want to protect your franchise quarterback, and you want to give him time to do whatever the hell he does on the field. That is make defenders miss with his legs. That is hit receivers downfield with his arm. That is feed the ball to Mark Andrews when he can, or Isaiah Likely. Lamar's so good at it all. But you need to protect him. You need to make sure your franchise, and he is your franchise, he is protected weekly. Because the last thing you want is a Lamar Jackson with no time, a Lamar Jackson that has to scramble, and a Lamar Jackson that can't sit in the pocket and kind of dink and dunk downfield and then throw those deep balls, hit guys in space, find open spaces with his legs. You want it to come natural, man. So if you have three positions on the offensive line that aren't figured out yet, you're probably going to go with one of those positions, whether it may be guard or tackle in the draft. In the first round.
Yeah.
So that is what we really expect the Ravens to do. But I know Eric DeCosta is always going to say, best player available. It's like, say it with me. Yes, we get it. So that's what the Ravens are going to go with, I'm sure, at that point in time. But I truly believe maybe that shouldn't be the mindset in this draft. But who am I? I'm not a GM. I'm not a head coach. I'm just a talking head that you're listening to right now. So in my opinion, they should definitely go O-line. But I really do think you're going to see this team go best available, because the positions right now for me, Kevin, are O-line that takes top priority. That's a position they need the most. Then it goes cornerback. You want to add another legit corner in there. I like that they brought back Arthur Millette. I think that's great. But then you have Marlon and Brandon Stevens, who Brandon Stevens played phenomenal last year. Marlon dealt with the injuries, but we know what Marlon can be when he is healthy and out on the field. Adding another corner would be awesome. Receiver might be my two. It might be receiver and cornerback 2A, 2B for me right now. So offensive line takes the cake, as it should. I feel like, if you disagree with me, that is completely okay. Agree to disagree on that. Not you, just everyone out there, because some people may be like, all right, we definitely need a receiver in the first round. That's the way I want to go. But I'm telling you what, I really, truly believe it should be offensive line, because losing 3 starters, that's tough for any team, especially at the positions that they lost.
Right. And we have seen Lamar Jackson not have time, as you kind of talked about earlier there. And like, we know that Lamar, out of any quarterback in the league, he is the one that can create something out of nothing. He is the one that can roll out of the pocket and, pressure gets in his face early. He can make a rusher miss and, do his crazy Lamar magic and make something happen. But you don't want that. You don't want to rely on that. Like, it's great he can do it, and it's really cool to watch when it's all successful and he runs around and makes a play. But we know that when Lamar is cool, calm, and collected in that pocket, he has time to throw. He just dots and dices defenses up. That's the player that you want to have, because then defenses have to start respecting that. That opens up the run game. And, oh, by the way, they signed Derrick Henry, which will help a ton when it comes to that. So it's not even just the passing game, Rocco. As you talked about, it's super important, but also opening up those rushing lanes for Derrick Henry on the offensive line and figuring that all out, and just the different ways that this offense can be so dangerous. But the good thing about this class is essentially every one of Baltimore's needs, it's a really good year to need one. Like the offensive line, really deep class. Like the first 3 rounds, there are guys who you could say, oh, that guy's a first-round pick, or that guy's an early second-round pick. But he's getting taken in the 3rd round because of how deep the class is. Wide receiver, you can find wide receivers in this class, whether it's at pick 30, whether it's in the 2nd round, whether it's in the 3rd round. So it's not like Baltimore is necessarily going to be pigeonholed into one position. I think I'd be okay with it being best player available if they take a need. If they're picking between an offensive lineman, a wide receiver, a cornerback, and let's just say an edge guy. Those are 4 needs, right? I'm not saying, okay, take a running back in the 1st round. I would literally lose my mind if they took a running back in the 1st round this year. No. But like, tight end or like defensive tackle, for example. Like Johnny Newton's been somebody out of Illinois who, the defensive lineman, beast of a player, great prospect, but Baltimore just signed Justin Madubuike to a $100 million contract extension, and they have Travis Jones and Broderick Washington. Like, that's not a need for them. There are more pressing needs, and especially in the post-Lamar Jackson contract era, it's more important for you, if you're the Ravens, to address those needs through the draft and get those guys on rookie deals. And look, if your offensive line room, you get to pick 30 and all your guys have like late 2nd round grades on them on your draft board, and there are a bunch of 1st round graded wide receivers, Baltimore's probably going to take the wide receiver, even though offensive line is a bigger need. So I'm not saying that just completely abandon, your BPA and reach for a 3rd round grade in the 1st round, but within reason. Obviously BPA, we've seen the Ravens do it a lot. The most recent example being Kyle Hamilton, when safety was not a need whatsoever, but you can't pass on a guy like that.
It's not a need now, and it won't be for years because of Kyle Hamilton, because of how good he is. So it's if you want to say in Eric DeCosta we trust in Eric DeCosta, and I know people want to say what they want about some of the past drafts, but also look at some of the past drafts and a lot of the hits. Eric DeCosta has done a really good job in just picking the Ravens' needs and picking those best players available in recent years and bringing them in. I think this guy's done a fantastic job bringing in the free agents he's brought in, getting Lamar Jackson signed, getting Derrick Henry here in Baltimore. I have to remind myself that Derrick Henry is a Baltimore Raven, because it's just like, it's been kind of a quiet offseason, but that was such a splash. And then the Madubuike signing. So when you least expect Eric DeCosta to strike, it's like Eric DeCosta strikes again. What I'll say about, the offensive line, the first round, that first pick at 30th overall, Kev, maybe Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh, they got together and they're like, all right, we see 3 holes on the offensive line. We're now down a tackle and 2 guards. But do we have the guys on our roster that could be starters next season? Do we have the guys that can compete? Do we need to take an offensive lineman in the first round? I still truly believe it would benefit the Ravens tremendously to do so. But maybe they're like, okay, Ben Cleveland could be a starter this season. Andrew Voorhees could be a starter this season. Saleh or Daniel Faalele could be a starter this season. And then you have other guys in the mix. Maybe that's their thought process. But if it's not, if you're like, you have any doubts whatsoever about one of those guys we just mentioned, I would go offensive line. And, you're not going to fill all 3 positions in the first round, but to fill at least one and get an established young guy in there that is going to, come in, you're going to have him for a few years, and maybe you could turn him into your franchise tackle or guard and pair him beside Tyler Linderbaum. That would be a great idea for the Ravens at 30th overall. But we'll see. Like we said, man, best available. We know that's definitely what they're going to do. That's just their mentality. That is what the Ravens do.
It is. And I'm about to drop, Rocco, maybe one of the hottest takes of the year right now.
Go for it.
Zay Flowers was a BPA pick. Like, it was a need, but they could have easily drafted. They needed a corner last year. Like, they did need a corner last year. They could have started that offensive line. Like, they had a lot of their guys, like only really left guard was in there. Wide receiver wasn't like it wasn't a need, because it was, but there were bigger needs out there where you could have definitely argued, hey, they should have really taken a corner here, because Brandon Stevens was slated to play safety last year until there were 80 million injuries in training camp. And they said, we really need you to play corner again. And he just bursted onto the scene. There were other positions as well that maybe you could have argued were bigger than wide receiver. So I'm sure some people won't agree with me on that. And I'm not saying it was the Kyle Hamilton-esque level of a BPA pick, but with Odell being signed at that point, they had just given out that $15 million guaranteed to Odell. Obviously, you still had Bateman, you still had Duvernay and Wallace that, a lot of people believed in at the time. They didn't necessarily need a wide receiver, but Flowers, they had him very highly graded, and that's just kind of their philosophy. And I agree with you too, Rocco, where I think Baltimore, and this is a point I've made, so I'm glad you agree with me on it, is that they want to give their young guys a chance. Like, one thing that I've noticed, whether it be from the press conferences, be from their off season, is like they want to give Daniel Faalele a chance. They want to give Rashad Bateman a chance. They want to give some of these young defensive linemen, young edge rushers, which we talked about last week, a chance, like Odafe Owe and David Ajabo. It feels like they really want to see what they have, and it's going to be important for those guys to step up in a post-Lamar Jackson contract world when you're also handing out those $100 million contracts. So that's why them having 9 picks, that's a lot of picks already, but I could easily see them moving up and down the draft board, as Eric DeCosta loves to do. Yeah, double digits. I could see it happening. What, you holding up 9? Is that
yes,
holding up the 9?
I'm holding up 9.
I was
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
They can move around. Do you have any preference? I think you said last week you'd rather have them just stick and pick at 30, but there are avenues where they could go and get a pick in the later, or I guess not later, earlier second round, and add maybe 2025 draft capital, because Eric DeCosta talked about this at the press conference as well. With the way NIL is working now in college, there are just less seniors, or less underclassmen, less juniors, because they want to stay in school, get the NIL money. So it's technically a quote unquote weaker draft class, because NIL has kind of just started up and everybody now is riding that wave.
Yeah, it depends on who's there. Honestly, Kev, it'll have to be like a wait and see thing for the Ravens. Would it surprise me if they trade? Nothing would surprise me with Eric DeCosta. He's so calculated with his moves, with what he does. I mean, last year's draft was crazy because of the Lamar news, and then the Odell news a couple days or a week before that. It was just like leading up to it. That week was insane. When did they sign Odell? Was it 2 weeks before?
It was a couple
week
weeks before the draft. Couple
weeks before.
Not
because I remember that was like the whole thing. It was like, have you talked to Lamar? What was what's the deal? Did you come here because you wanted to play with Lamar? Obviously he did, but he wasn't signed at the time. Lamar wasn't. So that was the question. Wouldn't surprise me if Eric DeCosta's like, all right, let's make a trade. Let's bring in a big player. Who knows, man? It's like, that's what's so great about this time of the year. It's like football doesn't start for another 5, 6, whatever months, 4 or 5 months. And it's like, this is like, for football fans, draft night is like the holidays, because you're trying to figure out what gifts you're going to get for your team. And is it the gift that you want? And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like, oh, we got a lump of coal. But sometimes that lump of coal turns into a diamond. So all depends. Be patient, Ravens flock. I will say that. And trust in your GM like you have for years and years and years. I think he's going to steer you in the right direction.
Yep, 100%. I think he's definitely earned that. And yeah, draft is the busiest weekend of my year, Rocco. I know it's for you too, insanely busy. And so the Ravens had to go and Lamar had to go and drop that, like the biggest contract extension in franchise history 4 hours before the draft started. I'm like, great, this is already the busiest weekend of my entire year. It's got 10 times busier. I like scratched like 3 live shows that day. Like it was unbelievable how that all worked out.
I remember just saying last year, I was like sitting in my office when that news broke, and I thought it was going to be like, obviously not an easy day, but like, all right, when are the Ravens going to draft? I'm talking to Morgan on the phone. We're going over our plan for the draft, figuring out what we're going to do for that first pick. Because sometimes, I mean, last year was a case of if that pick isn't in before our show happens at 11:30 or 10:50, we just have to talk and kind of say like, oh, the Ravens are coming up soon. They're on the clock soon, and we got to wait. So that was like our plan. We had it all scripted out. We were like, all right, we'll figure out who the Ravens are going to take. We're good. Lamar comes out with that video, and I cursed so many times. I was so happy for the fan base. But for my job that day, I was like, oh, my God, what the – like, oh, like, just like saying every word in the book, like, why today? Why? And like immediately ran out in the newsroom and was like real calm, honestly, which is like that's – not how I do things. But I'm just like, everybody, I need you to listen to me. Lamar Jackson just signed an extension with the Ravens. Everyone looked at me like, what? And I was like, yep. I was like, I will be getting ready for my A block hit at 4 or 5 or whenever the hell you want me in this show. So madness, hopefully not that crazy to that magnitude this year, but who knows? Maybe it's like a big time trade for a big time player. Get Lamar some more help, and who knows, anything could happen, man. That's why it's so great.
Yeah, I was so glad the saga was over, but the timing was crazy. But you know what? If that's what it needed to be to happen, then that's what it needed to be. So we'll see what happens, but I think another maybe not like that crazy in terms of the biggest extension in history news, but still a crazy draft nonetheless coming up in a couple of weeks. Rocco, I appreciate you, though. Thank you so much for hopping on, as always, talking Ravens football. And as always, please tell people where they can find you, what you're working on now.
You can find me on Fox 45, Sports Unlimited, myself and Morgan Adsit, 7 days a week. We're on trying to provide as much and as best content as we can. The Ryan Ripken Show with Kevin and those jabronis over there. We have a great time. That's fun. Me and Kevin get roasted the most because it's just who we are as people. So if you ever want to tune in,
Short Kings Unite.
The Short Kings Unite. Listen, Deonte Harty,
another
if I get a chance to interview him, I might be taller, and that would make me feel very good about myself because there's not many athletes I interview that I am even on the same level.
You can interview me, and I'll be taller than you.
I'll be short. Kevin, you are not an athlete, though.
Well, I can be. If you need
you were, yeah. I mean, like former. I
played baseball in high school.
Former all-state baseball player.
I was injured half the time, but I was technically still.
Right. Listen, I was a former All-State bench warmer, so I don't know if that impresses anybody, but
that is pretty impressive.
Great statistician when I did play. So yeah,
I was a statistician when I was out. That was my side job.
If you have like a beer league baseball team and need me to keep your stat books, like keep that box score, I got you. I'm the guy to call. So, let me know.
Yeah. Well, you can find Rocco over at Fox 45, Ryan Ripken Show. If you have a link for your stat keeping business, I can put that in the description as well if you need me to. So you can find Rocco over there. And of course, be sure to follow him on social media as well. Thank you, Rocco, again. I appreciate it. And thank you for tuning into Locked On Ravens. Be sure to, again, subscribe, follow along to the channel and the show here. Really appreciate the community we're growing, video form, audio form, social media, subtext. We got it all. I really appreciate it. Coming up, we'll be back on Monday. Unless there's some crazy Ravens news, then we'll do a bonus episode and maybe a live stream as well. But we're right back here on Monday talking more Ravens. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here then on Locked On Ravens.